What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes always deliver the big names. Here we are talking to Jon Anik, the UFC's play-by-play announcer, the greatest of all time, and in my Mount Rushmore of play-by-play announcers in all of sports. Hello, Jon. How are you?
Oh, man, better now, my man. Better now, man. It's always good to be with you. You know, Goes hits me so hard that I better be focused at whatever hour. So I know it's pretty early where you boys are, but it's always good to chop it up with you, especially on the heels of what we saw just less than a week ago.
You still buzzing from all that? That's a lot to take in. You saw the greatest heavyweight of all time versus the greatest light heavyweight of all time, who probably carries just the GOAT status alone, in Jon Jones. And then you got to shake hands with the next president, and I'm sure that's a whole circus with Secret Service and everything. And then, of course, Chucky Olives and Michael Chandler. It was a strong finish to UFC 309.
It's just a lot. These weeks are a lot, right? And I have oftentimes said there are 15 Super Bowls a year, the one the NFL puts on, and then the 14 that the UFC puts on. But yes, within each pay-per-view, they can take on a different tone or tenor. And I think when you sort of parlay all factors with this one, Jon Jones's return, potentially the last fight for Stipe and Jon Jones, the president-elect coming in the building after recently being reelected. Yeah, it was a lot. This is the latest I've ever sent my scripts to my producers. I shipped them off at 3:37 a.m. on Saturday morning. And when I saw my stage manager, Niner, at the morning weigh-in, he was like, have you seen those formats? You're not calling the fight on Saturday night. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're just going to be reading fucking promos, So, yes, it was a lot. I apologize for how much I had to get in there with all of the advertisements, but, we're commercial-free on pay-per-view, so it is what it is. But, yeah, Johnny Bones, man, that's it. Still buzzing from Johnny Bones. Really happy for him. I have a great relationship with him. I have known him for an exceedingly long time. And the fact that at this point in time, he's still raising championship banner number 16 is absurd. So happy for Jon Jones and happy that he's going to fight Tom Aspinall, probably International Fight Week 2025. Let's go.
That's the prediction that I made on our watch along, that these two needed to fight. And when I saw Tom Aspinall's YouTube, which is excellent, by the way, he said he waited around and he clearly meets Hunter Campbell, Dana White. Sounded like they had a chat with they were going to have a chat with Jon Jones, and then they wanted to chat with Tom. Then Tom fast forwards and says it was a great chat, big news. And all I did was put on my hat and say, wait a minute, that's a big fight, International Fight Week here in Las Vegas. And you just said it. That's awesome. So you're kind of hearing something similar?
No, I have no inside information.
Okay.
I have no inside information. I truly don't, right? You can call it informed speculation, but oftentimes I'm the last guy to know. Yeah, I get bout announcement emails, so I don't prep for fights that have been canceled, but oftentimes I'm the last guy to know. Belal Muhammad's like, my man, what's going on December 7th? And I'm like, wouldn't you like to know, champ? But no, I don't have any inside information, but I do believe that fight is going to happen. And I think most telling was just the way Jon Jones handled his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan. And then I talked to him after the fact in the back for ESPN, and I was like, are we getting 3 or 4 more of these things or what? He was going into the Stipe fight with a fight-by-fight mentality, and he sounded like the furthest thing from retirement with Rogan after the fact. So that's very encouraging. And this is the fight, right? Even though Jon Jones maybe isn't the natural heavyweight in body that Tom Aspinall is. He's not going to fight Alex Pineda right now. He's going to fight Tom Aspinall. And it just comes down to what Jon Jones's number is. What is Jon Jones's net worth? What number is he looking for? Is it $25 million to show? What is Michael Jordan worth? What is the greatest of all time worth? So, yeah, I feel like the company is in a great position to make this fight. And I think you got to do Las Vegas. You got to do International Fight Week 2025. So you and me are aligned.
Let's dig into this, however, all right? I know that Dana White gets asked about stadium shows, and he gives a litany of excuses why he doesn't want to do it. He says the sand, Abu Dhabi, they had problems, or the wind. I forget what he says.
Right.
Why don't you go to Hawaii? Because it might rain. Okay, Aloha Stadium doesn't have a roof or anything. But Allegiant Stadium, have you been in it, John? It's nice and cozy and air-conditioned in July. It's the walk from fucking hell to get from the Mandalay Bay, which is the closest hotel to the arena, right? You sweat your balls off going over that bridge. But once you get in, it's nice and air conditioned. Dana White likes to break records. The record for the biggest MMA show ever is, they say, 90,000 in Japan back in the Pride days or the K1 days, but really I think officially it's like 70,000. If you go to Allegiant, you can break that. So now you don't have the whole Croke Park, oh, past 1 a.m. they won't let us do anything. Vegas, this is your town, Dana White. This deserves to be in a stadium, see or no?
So I have been to Allegiant Stadium. I take that back. I went for like a Pac-12 championship football game. I think my nose was bleeding, though, with where my seats were. So there are a lot of issues with a stadium show, right? How do you make it a good take for 70,000 plus, right? You can't just be in the record-breaking business. Dana White is in the live event business. And promotionally or otherwise, when I talk to people who have never been to a UFC live event and they want to, maybe get into it, right? You have to make sure that that experience is incredible. So certainly I wouldn't put it past our live production team to get this done and make it aesthetically pleasing to every individual. Is Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall the right fight to command 70,000 plus? You would probably have that answer more than I would. So I'm not trying to like curb your enthusiasm. I do think the fight has to happen in Las Vegas so that we can all, do recreational things deep into the night when the fight's over. But yeah, I just don't know. I just think it's ambitious, my man, to think that, come 6-7 months from now, the UFC is going to do that show at Allegiant Stadium. But certainly somehow, some way, someday, I do think it shall be done.
Who is your pound for pound number one fighter on the planet? And if you may also tell us, what's your criteria for determining that?
All right, so Jon Jones is now back in the conversation as far as I'm concerned because he is an actively competing athlete, right? We were talking about Jon Jones in a pound-for-pound setting when he hadn't competed since March of 2023. So Islam Makhachev was the guy, and if you're only as good as your last fight, his was in June, 5 months ago, and to get that takedown and that submission against Dustin Poirier in 5th round of a championship title defense, to me, that's about as good as it gets, and I don't know that he has lost that perch necessarily. But when you look at what Jon Jones now has done pound for pound, in unceremoniously disposing of Ciryl Gane and making Gane look like a true deer in the headlights out there, and then doing what he just did to Stipe. And let me just say, Stipe Miocic, not unlike Daniel Cormier and Anderson Silva, these guys are made of Teflon, right? Go back and watch those elbows, right? How did Jon Jones not inflict long-term visual damage on Stipe, right? It's amazing to me that Stipe is not going to have some lifelong scar because of what we just saw there. So I don't actually have a problem with, I don't have a problem with fan opinion or presidential opinion or any MMA opinion out there, right? I think Jon Jones now has a case as the number one ranked pound for pound fighter in the world. But as far as my rankings, if that's what you're asking me for, Islam doesn't lose that distinction or designation just because Jon Jones has been great. So Islam Makhachev is my pound for pound king, but Johnny Bones certainly is on his heels.
Interesting. All right.
If we kept talking about this, we would be here for about 2 hours. We literally had one of the biggest discussions ever yesterday on another show that we did amongst our whole staff trying to determine pound for pound and all that. But I do want to ask you a little bit about Jon Jones and maybe what he's thinking, Jon. So this is the way I look at things. If Jon were to fight Tom Aspinall, and I say if because you never really know all the factors that are involved, right? Even if he went in there and let's just say, and Tom Aspinall, I don't want to say wipes the floor with him, but let's just say he handles him. Do you think Jon can compartmentalize and realize that? Because I feel like a lot of fans forget just how impressive it is to go up a weight class, let alone light heavyweight to heavyweight. That's not your regular jump. You have to transform your body. It's a huge risk. You're fighting in a completely, it's like when you first buy a car, right? It takes you a while to kind of figure out the speeds and all that. He has to do that in front of the entire world. I would have the utmost respect for a guy pushing himself the way he is right now at heavyweight, right? Do you think he realizes that? Because you look at guys like Floyd Mayweather, you look at a Joe Calzaghe, yeah, they retired with the big O at the end, right? But a lot of people kind of point that they maybe didn't push themselves the way they should have. I think Jon Jones, win or lose, will probably still come out a winner in the long run.
I love the way you frame that. Certainly, I think with respect to Joe Calzaghe and Floyd Mayweather, that Jon Jones has already pushed himself beyond those guys, right? Even if people want to denigrate the Stipe win because it happened at 42 years of age. I don't think there really is anything left for Jon Jones to accomplish, but there is financial gain to be had. And even though you can look at some of the work that Jon Jones has done for Netflix recently, I'm someone who studies vocal quality, and I can tell you, like, Jon Jones has an unbelievable bass and tenor and authority to his voice. And he talks about acting classes, right? So I do think it stands to reason that Jon Jones could be Hollywood and make a lot of money there. But I think what he wants is like that 30, 40, $50 million payday, which he so deserves at this point in time, because in heavyweight MMA goes, anything can happen. And certainly in light heavyweight MMA, anything can happen. But the consequences are so great when it comes to 4-ounce gloves with these guys chucking that, yeah, I mean, Tom Aspinall could knock Jon Jones out in a minute. And I don't think it's legacy diminishing whatsoever, but you better make $30 million, because then at that point in time, maybe Jon Jones doesn't want to have another training camp and rematch Tom Aspinall or have 2 or 3 more fights, right? Because in my mind, he has 16 championship banners already hanging. So there is a lot to unpack, you know, for a guy who's going to weigh 25 pounds, in theory, less than Tommy. So I just want to see Jon Jones get paid, and I think that's what's going to happen, and I think that's going to be the driving force behind making the fight, because if it does end unceremoniously for Jon, I don't think it's legacy staining, and hopefully, you know, he won't feel like it is either.
John, you brought up Netflix, and I did want to talk a little bit about that. So kind of a 2-part question. Did you watch Tyson and Jake Paul and all that?
Yeah, I was banging keys, typing my scripts. I had one eye on it because so many people were telling me that it was fixed and that I needed to bet the over with my life savings in terms of the total rounds. So I watched it to see if those people were right, and they were right.
Well, how appreciative are you of your production team? The way you guys handle things, I think it just, anybody who's a sports fan can kind of see, you know, there were a lot of hiccups, obviously, with that Netflix broadcast, but there's one in particular that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it applies to you in a sense. They kind of just threw people together, right? So you got Mauro Ranallo, you got Rosie Perez, you got Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr., phenomenal career. He deserves to be on a broadcast like that. Say what you will about Rosie Perez. I know she's a big fan of the show, of boxing and all that. And then you have Mauro Ranallo, right? He does what you do, and he's tremendous at what he does. But there were moments, okay, especially in the Serrano-Taylor fight, where they're just going toe-to-toe and they are throwing. There's not really much technique. They're fighting. They left boxing out the window at that point.
Yeah.
But because of the broadcast team and because they just kind of got thrown together, they don't know each other. They don't have the repertoire that you guys have. There are times where I just wanted Rosie and Roy to just go away and let Mauro Ranallo's iconic voice follow the action that's happening, because he makes you feel like what you're watching is the most important thing going on. And so there were times where they were absolutely throwing at each other, but the other ones were trying to finish what they were talking about, but it just didn't really apply to what was going on anymore because of how fast the fight was going. How long did it take you to kind of get that with your team, get that dialed down? Because when we see these replays throughout history, we want your iconic voice attached to it. We want Mauro Ranallo's iconic voice, right? The Howard Cosell's, the Jim Lambleys.
Do you believe in miracles? Like that?
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to go through, and especially on a night that was so important for them. I thought it kind of took away a little bit. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that, the pressures of being the play-by-play and having your voice attached to these moments?
So there's a lot to unpack there. So as far as having your voice attached to the moments, we've talked about this before. I take it very seriously. I don't have any shtick whatsoever, right? I want each individual call to sort of be unique to that moment. Some are better than others. I never know what I'm going to say. You can even look back at this last weekend. And again, it's very few words. It's very economical. Oftentimes it's about just how you inflect and how you say those words in that moment, right? Humbly, I think the way I said "and still" was about as throaty and good as I can say it. And I think what followed was, how good is Johnny Bones? How good, right? But oftentimes it's just about how you say it in that moment and having analysts who give you at least a little bit of real estate to actually punctuate that call. So we're never perfect as far as not having a traffic jam. But I will say, as far as the chemistry that you're alluding to, or the lack thereof in this instance, number one, you got to table ego, right? It's not about how much real estate I have or Joe has or DC has. Some fights, it's the two of them and it's me reading promos, and you just got to deal with that. But largely, I feel like you either have chemistry or you don't. I think I've worked with 17 different broadcast teams, and the first time I worked with Joe Rogan was at UFC 155 in 2012 on 3 days' notice, and I had barely met the man. And humbly, I feel like we had chemistry, right? So I kind of think a lot of the onus is on the play-by-play guy, but you either have it or you don't. Yes, it can be fostered and it can be developed. And you guys all know famously Brian Stan left me high and dry, decided to just go, do greater things and pursue greater initiatives and be the leader that he is and get a big bankroll and all of those things, But yeah, I mean, throwing a team together that doesn't have any experience together is not ideal, but I think it's up to the individual broadcasters. And then you either have chemistry or you don't. Anybody out there ever been on a fucking date? Right? I mean, I don't know. I feel like date 2 or 3, you kind of know if you're going to marry this person or not. Maybe not. So, yeah, I mean, it gave us a lot of confidence, I will say, when I look at how everything went down. We're trying to be as listenable as possible for 8 fucking hours. And, if people aren't talking about us on Sunday morning, then we've done our job.
You just went right to the next topic I want to talk about. 8 fucking hours. Yeah.
Give John your Rosie Perez invitation real quick before you go to the next question.
I don't do a good Rosie Perez.
Yeah, you do.
Billy, you so stupid. Okay. 8 fucking hours. That is a long time. And you're going through a lot of fighters, right? And they're saying a lot of things. Like Bo Nickal, right? We're going to go back to this past card, right? He had a little bit of criticism. What I want to talk about is your podcast, Daniel Cormier, his YouTube channel. How important are these avenues now where we actually get to hear your guys' side of the story right after? To me, it seems like, and I've often said with our show, is a form of therapy in a way. If you don't have it, those emotions sometimes don't get out to the right people. You keep them inside. I thought you guys were fair. But how important is it to have these avenues to kind of be able to clarify what happens during an 8-hour show, which is kind of difficult, right?
So I think my bosses, Craig Borsari and Zach Candido, would say it's not important at all. Why don't you touch your top lip to your bottom lip and just go play golf or something, But yes, for me, it is therapeutic. It was the impetus for the Anik and Florian podcast when we launched it in 2015, in part to provide free content to the fans who have given me so much, right? I mean, that's a big jumping off point for the podcast. But yeah, to also have a conduit or an outlet to get stuff out there after a pay-per-view. And at my core, I'm just an MMA fan, right? Who happens to have a high-profile job in the space. Rogan always says we're professional fans. So it is definitely therapeutic for me. Nothing I like more than doing those pay-per-view recap shows with Ken Flo and with Ray Longo. And there's disagreement, Kenny felt like Bo Nickal deserved a lot of the criticism that the fan base is levying upon him, and Ray Longo and I didn't, So there's even friction within that I think can be healthy. But I do think that sometimes when we arrive at Saturday night, if I could peel back the curtain a little bit, my boss, Zach, could say, by the time we show up, everything that all of you guys have said has been aggregated so much that I know exactly what you think about all these fights, and maybe things aren't as fresh as they could be. So we've been doing our podcast coming up on the 10-year anniversary in April, and it will always be free. But sometimes, right, you can be the opposite of the beneficiary when you're on a hot mic all the time, right? Like now I'm being criticized now for criticizing people for criticizing Bo Nickal. You know what I mean? When for me, it's just like having fun talking about MMA, not trying to garner headlines.
John, who on the current roster have you not called their fight and you would like to?
I just called Farid Basharat's fight for the first time. It's always interesting when I'll come up on like Marcus McGee and I'll go through my fighter card library. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think I necessarily had called his fight. But I just go back to make sure I don't have any Marcus McGee notes. And it's like, oh man, this guy's 3 or 4-0 in the UFC, and I haven't called his fight. It happened with a lot of the British guys because I think I went 9.5 years without calling fights in England. So there was a while where I wasn't, doing the Paddy Pimblett shows and things like that. So what a great question. I'm trying to think if there's anybody that comes to mind. Those are 2 recently, Farid Basharat and Marcus McGee, that I have done fights for. Forever I didn't call a Dominic Cruz fight, which was really interesting, because he had that extended layoff, right? One of the last pay-per-views that I did not work, or the last pay-per-view that I did not work before taking over, was UFC 207 when he fought Cody Garbrandt. And then it was a long time before he was back in a pay-per-view setting. So that's always a cool thing when you have no notes on a guy and that fighter meeting gives you, it's like asking about like their kids' names and birthdays for the first time.
I like McGee. I thought his goose was cooked when Martinez went back to the leg kicks in that last round because he was hobbling. But man, I really like McGee. And then who from the past would you have liked to call the roster? It's just that your careers, you weren't around when they were fighting.
So I thought I was never going to get the chance to call a George St. Pierre fight. When he fought Carlos Condit, I was doing like a mock call, or actually, I think it was actually like a movie theater call. So if you went to the movie theater, you actually got to hear us. But I thought that I wasn't going to get a chance to call a George St. Pierre fight. And then he came back and fought Michael Bisping. So Chuck the Iceman Liddell, but I missed him by a fairly considerable margin. I think he's the first name that comes to mind as a guy that I would have loved to have called a fight for, but most of the guys, I was around, I came in just soon enough to be able to call a lot of those exiting legends, so, but Chuck Liddell, definitely.
That's a great one. All right. Jim Miller, I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I know in the past, we've talked about Ferguson, and you've said he needs to be in the Hall of Fame, and I agree with you there. Too many people focus too much on what haven't people done versus what have people done, but we all have different opinions. I want to get your thoughts on just how fantastic Jim Miller is, what he's done. He's an Iron Man, and I know he never won a title, but these records he just keeps putting up is pretty damn special in my eyes. Your thoughts?
It's pretty simple, right? I have hosted the UFC Hall of Fame induction ceremony for 12 or 13 years, right? But the Hall of Fame is a little bit clunky, right? Not only is there no voting body, but the Hall of Fame is comprised of 4 separate, unique wings. So there are a lot of different ways to get into the Hall of Fame, right? Robbie Lawler right now is in the Hall of Fame for a fight in which he took part. My thesis statement largely dovetails with Daniel Cormier's, that Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Jim Miller can be Hall of Famers if they are in a different wing than Daniel Cormier and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Would you like me to expand upon that? Please. The greatest of all time fighters, the Mount Rushmore fighters, right? Demetrius Johnson, George St. Pierre, Jon Jones, shouldn't be in the same wing with fighters who have longevity type records. Now, Jim Miller is the all-time wins leader, right? Donald Cowboy Cerrone did amazing things. Charles Oliveira did a lot of the things that Jim Miller and Donald Cerrone did, but he also won the sport's ultimate prize, right? Donald Cerrone had a longer winning streak than Jim Miller did. He at least competed for the undisputed championship. Every case is unique, right? Mm-hmm. I would like to see it be a broad voting body that determines these things. Largely, I think the way our Hall of Fame, even if it's clunky, I think it works, right? But like, what are you going to do with Ray Longo, right? I mean, it's a UFC Hall of Fame. It's not an MMA Hall of Fame, but Ray Longo has Chris Weidman. He has Matt Serra. He has Aljamain Sterling. He has Merab Dwalish. Could you imagine if one of his other guys ends up doing something? I mean, how is Ray Longo not a contributor in the UFC Hall of Fame? But when is Ray Longo's name going to come calling? How do you handle Jessica Andrade and Rafael Dos Anjos and all these fighters that, didn't have long championship reigns, but they won the undisputed title? I mean, I'm very passionate about this, but, DC's not trying to take any sort of jab at Jim Miller. But if you're Daniel Cormier with fucking 8 UFC gold belts at home, you want to be in a wing that isn't just open to everybody.
Well, I like it. They did reshape the Hall of Fame a few years ago, so I don't see why, as the sport evolves, they can't do that. Yeah, because in the past, I think it was just a Hall of Fame, and they introduced the Pioneer Wing, the Fight Wing, the
It was a
Contributor Wing.
long time ago that we went to those 4 wings, you know.
Yeah, because
I
at
mean, I
first
want
it
to
was
say
just
like
those
10
those
years
guys
ago.
that all came out lined up at one of the UFCs,
Right.
back then.
The Expo. I mean, I remember the first Hall of Fame induction ceremony that I hosted was at the Expo. Now it's like the most nerve-wracking thing on my calendar.
Is it really?
Well, I don't have a lot of, and I mean, I have now 12 times doing that. I have a lot of experience addressing a big crowd like that. But when you hear the Oscar lady say, "And now here is your host, the voice of the UFC, Jon Anik," and you walk out and it's all of your contemporaries and all of these fighters, and when I walked out there in 2014, I got booed, and now obviously I don't, and it's a lot like walking out and looking at the entire MMA world in front of you. So yeah, I get nervous much more for that than like calling a Conor McGregor pay-per-view.
Yeah. All right, let's just wrap up here with, you have a card in a few weeks. We probably won't get a chance to talk to you then. I know you have a busy slate. Alexandre Pantoja, man, this guy's really turning into something special, and he has big shoes to fill in Demetrius Johnson. I don't think he ever needs to do it necessarily to be talked about like a Demetrius Johnson, because he's his own guy, right? He's coming, I guess, at a time where it's just harder to distinguish yourself like that with 11 title defenses. But can you talk about Pantoja taking on the newcomer Kai Asakura, who did an interview on our channel recently, and he said, "Man, don't even worry, I got this," when it came to 125, making 125.
So it's so nice to get a question about Alexandre Pantoja, right? Because even if Goes and I are a little bit tired of the pound for pound conversation, how do you have it without this guy, right? What type of human weapon is actually going to be able to put Alexandre Pantoja away? When you think about all the wars that he has been in, to have never been finished and to never really have come that close to being finished, there are so many things that are impressive about this man: the work ethic, the coachability, his jiu-jitsu coach and head coach, Bahumpa, obviously I know exceedingly well. But it's just the ability to go to that place that people like me can't go to, athletically or otherwise, right? The ability to dig deep when maybe your cardiovascular base isn't there. I think that's really what sets him apart. Yeah, he's got every skill. He's got finishing ability. But I just think it's that mental toughness that allows him to go to that place when maybe his body fails him is really what sets him apart. Very excited to see Kai Asakura live for the first time. Electric fighter. And I just think that Pantoja is the absolute man. Like, I'm just excited to get a question about the guy because he just doesn't get his due. And credit to the UFC and the way they handled UFC 310, and credit to Shavkat Rakhmonov, right? Because Shavkat Rakhmonov had a shot on paper at the Undisputed Championship, and he could have refused the Ian Machado-Gary fight were it not to be for an interim championship. And he took that fight and took a title fight off the table. And the UFC also gets a chance here simultaneously to not undercut their champion, Belal Muhammad, 4 months after he becomes the champion, right? So they're doing right by Belal, making a major statement there. And then they're also promoting Pantoja and giving him the opportunity to headline in the fight capital of the world on December 7th. So I'm excited for UFC 310. I think Belal Muhammad, actually against doctor's orders, is going to show up in Vegas. So,
damn, that toe's that bad that they just don't want him moving.
He's not supposed to break a sweat for 6 to 8 weeks. Supposed to have a pick line with antibiotics in his arm for 40 days. So maybe I'm not supposed to share that stuff, but hopefully the welterweight.
It is ugly. It is an ugly pick, and it is an ugly toe. I didn't know it was that bad though, that they recommend he not fly around,
not sweat for like 6 to 8 weeks. You know how hard that is for somebody like Belal.
Damn, that's crazy. I do respect Shavkat for taking another fight. I mean, because he's risking a lot, obviously, but that makes him the gangster that he is. But I had hoped that they would make it not. This would suck because it goes against what I believe in. I don't think they should have made it for an interim. But the one thing I do like, a silver lining, is now that guy gets pay-per-view points.
Right.
So but I always want these guys to get paid as much as they can when there's an opportunity. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. No, I know we got to go. And you're right. So I don't see a ton of downside for them putting an interim championship on the line, right? But Ray Longo said on the Anik and Florian podcast, psychologically for Belal, even though maybe it makes the fight bigger, right? If Shavkat or Ian has a belt over their shoulder as well, I don't worry about that person getting paid George, I think they will take care of that person in terms of like pay-per-view. You know, that might have been part of the negotiation to take this fight without a belt on the line. But you do psychologically do something to Belal if, you know, he wins the belt, he beats Leon, he agrees to turn around quickly, and then he gets this infection and there's an interim championship on the line. So, yeah, I thought they might have done it. They could have. I think it's a pretty big statement about their support of their Palestinian-American champion, Belal Muhammad, that they are not putting an interim belt on the line.
Good stuff. Always great chatting with the great Jon Anik. Thank you so much for your time here on MMA Junkie Radio, and we can't wait for your call of the final event of the year for, well, not overall, but the final pay-per-view, UFC 310 goes, and I will be doing a watch along that night. Thanks, John. Great talking to you, man.
Boys. Thank you, guys.
Everybody.